excited y'all are here, and we're going to continue on in our Exodus study, but I wanted to talk today about two particular women in the book of Exodus, the two midwives of Exodus 1. And there's a reason for this. I mean, even going through, you have a Pharaoh who has an incredible name. Has an incredible position, but he's given no name. You have Moses' mom, who at this point isn't named, even though it's Moses' own mother. You have his sister in the story, who's his sister, and she's not named. The only two names we get outside of Moses early in the story are two midwives. And then you get this beautiful, beautiful verse in Exodus 1:20, and it looks like this. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and even became more numerous. And so for Mother's Day, as we continue to unpack Exodus, I wanted to start with something really simple. I wanted to start with God was good to the midwives. And what does this mean, and how can this encourage us? And I wanted to do this in a way in which I can say two things. If you are a mother, you understand the role that is. For some of us, right, for some of the women here, you have not been blessed with motherhood, and you want one day to be a mom, and there's something I think we can still hear on this day. And then finally, for some of the women, we would go, man, like motherhood's not even on the horizon for me yet. It's not what I'm looking at, but there's still something intrinsic to who you were created to be by God that we need to recognize on Mother's Day. One of the ways I would frame this, just to help you see this, is that Eve is called the mother of all things, but she's called the mother of all things well before she has a child. Is there something intrinsic to women that becomes motherhood? And do you have something motherly built into you even if you don't have a child? That's where I want us to start. But to understand this passage, we really need to get into what's going on in the beginning of the book of Exodus. And so I'll start with this simple idea. The Israelites are growing and they are multiplying, and what we're told is they become a threat to Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh has an idea. Now we're going to get into that, but the very first thing we see is that in Pharaoh's idea, he's going to operate from that seat of power. And he's going to ask the midwives to do something they're not really wanting to do. And so I want to just resonate with this for a moment, because I think we want to divorce the idea of fearing Pharaoh as something foreign to us. But maybe Pharaoh's not a person for you. I mean, don't get me wrong, maybe you have a boss you kind of fear, right? Maybe you have a neighbor who's a little out there and you fear him a little bit. But for most of us, Pharaoh is not a person, but there's still something we're afraid of. Maybe we're afraid of letting go of those kids as they get older, of letting them take steps on their own. Maybe we're afraid at the end of the day, right, to be faithful in one area because you look at it and go, I don't know how this is going to play out, and I'm terrified in this moment, and so what I do is I ignore it, or I medicate. And when I say medicate, what I mean by that, right, is we find some outlet that allows us to turn off the fear and ignore it. Maybe it's alcohol. Maybe if you're a young man, it's video games. Or it's some way in which I don't have to process the thing that is actually causing me stress and anxiety. In this moment, I just turn my brain off and pretend Pharaoh doesn't exist. And the reality of fearing Pharaoh is that in this moment, when I actually fear him and I don't confront him, it does a few things to me. The first thing is it will actually push me towards horrible things. Because what I begin to do is say, well, this isn't as bad as facing Pharaoh. So for some of us, it will look maybe something like this, where you go, man, I don't know what to do right now. I feel like if I stop working, I have to face something. So I'm going to work and work and work and work and never actually face the reality of what's causing me to work. And then at the core of that, there's a fear. And what you begin to do is go, I would rather see the ramifications of overworking in my life than deal with what I'm really afraid to deal with. Fearing a power or giving something power and fearing it, it will drive us towards other horrible things. It'll also drive us towards compromise, because the heart of that, right, is this isn't as bad. And so what do? Well, I mean, even looking at the midwives and their story, it's so easy for them to go, well, yes, we could kill some of the kids, because that's what we're about to see, but I get to live. And yes, some of these children will die, but surely we won't get them all. Right? This is like the beginning of every Bond villain ever, right? Like there's a greater good, and now I compromise my way to that good. This is where fearing Pharaoh really comes in. And I'll go one step further than that, and I will say, so often what it drives us to is an ethics of self-preservation over an ethics of godliness. And so in fearing to really do something, what we begin to do is to justify it because it allows me to be me and maintain who I am. Maybe one of the easiest ways that I would really unpack this is I would say, like when I was in school and I was struggling, I wasn't struggling to get good grades. I was struggling with self-confidence because when you're in a master's and a PhD program, you're around really smart people. And as I began to really wrestle with the fact that I struggle with some confidence issues in my life, I really began to look at that, and it was so much easier for me in fear of that to begin to go, well, if I do this and this, it protects me from wrestling with that fear. It was so easy to begin to go, well, this will actually help me, and helping me becomes the central question, not what is good. One of the ways I've seen this in the proverbial wisdom of the day is when we face evil, and the number one advice we typically get if it's evil at work is just keep your head down and shut up. I have given this advice to young men who are caught in hard places. And there's a reality to this, which is really simple. Sometimes the best thing you can do is self-preservation because you know you can't change the world around you. But we cannot let self-preservation become the end goal. Our God laid down his life that we may live. And when fear drives us to protect self over doing what is right, it will lead to destruction. When fearing the Pharaoh in our life begins to dictate our actions, it never leads towards godliness. And this is the reality that we're introduced to because the very first thing we get is as this threat builds, here's what we get. Then the king of Egypt, this is the Pharaoh, said to the Hebrew midwives, one who was named Sapphira and the other Puah, when you serve as midwives to the Hebrew women and you see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. I just wanted to catch this. The very first thing we see is that Pharaoh goes, I got a solution. This is becoming a problem. So he summons the midwives. Pause. Midwives often weren't married. This was at a time that is very different than our culture today. This was at a time where the greatest blessing you could have was kids. And these were women who were robbed of that. Women who had not been chosen by a man, betrothed, right, or something had happened. Most of our midwives were not married. They were women who wanted a family. Now, they were also recognized for intelligence and for understanding how to keep women as healthy as possible at this time during birthing, but they had every reason to be against the mom out of jealousy of the heart, out of a notion of the Lord's given them this, but he hasn't given this to me. And if you may not be a midwife, but you've definitely been in a place where you've seen the Lord bless somebody else and you think, why them, not me? You've definitely been in a place where you've been called to do something good, and as you step into that, everything in you, it just screams, I shouldn't be the one doing this because my heart is not for that. Yet these were women who dedicated themselves to helping other women have what they did not have themselves. Think about the beauty of that. This is almost like someone who's impoverished, who is giving their life to help others have a financial stability. Right? This is someone who is struggling on their own front, who is missing something on their own front, and they go, instead of proclaiming my own goodness and getting where I need to go, I'm going to lay that aside and make sure you're where you need to be. The midwife's very job was one that was at conflict with the sin in their heart because they were about helping wives have a lineage and husbands have a lineage and bringing this blessing into the world. And here is Pharaoh tempting the very nature of that. Hey, midwives, you should be the only Israelites ready to commit this atrocity because you're not having the kids. You're serving that. And then we get it. We get these two women and their names, Shiphrah and Puah. And their names mean righteous and brilliance. Brilliance is in shining or glowing. And I love the fact again that we get the Pharaoh, the man of power, the ruler over Egypt, and the Bible doesn't even name him. Now, if you're an archaeologist, this has caused you all kinds of a headache because you're like, I got to figure this out. But for the reader, you go, you're ignoring the powerful people and you're giving me the name of the house help. And then their names themselves, names in Exodus carry weight. Names at this point carry weight, right? Moses, right, was brought out of the water. And now you have brilliance, Puah. And you have Shiphrah, right? righteousness. And what do we see? We see two women who stood righteously and shined out as distinct in the face of an evil man wanting to do evil things. And I love that. It's almost like when God in his sovereignty laid this out, people began to move into the name they were given like it defined their character, something so different than the way we are today when we think a name is just a title. But for these women, right, Pua was like, I want to shine. This is what I was named after. For Shiphrah, she was, and then I want to be someone who is righteous. This is what I was named for. And they aimed at this even in spite of the fear of the Pharaoh. And maybe in all honesty, that is you, and you look at that and you go, man, I can do that. I can stand up to wickedness, and I can stand up in such a way that I embody who Christ is. But I would also say the reality of this is a lot harder when it's in our own lives than when we see it in a book. And for many of us, we're encouraged and we're inspired by this and we want to do this, but then Monday comes along and you remember some of this and you go, I don't remember what their names meant, but I'm inspired. Be righteous. Stand up for the Lord. And then Tuesday hits and you're like, I think we were in Exodus, but do good. And then Wednesday hits and all of a sudden you get called in, and the first thing we want to do is self-persevere and compromise. Because it is far easier to see wickedness and say, I can't fix that. Step to the side and let it happen. Yet we praise these women because they did not do that. We praise these women because they stood up to Pharaoh, even in fearing Pharaoh. We'll take a look at the last portion of this passage really quick, and here's what it says. When you serve a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, you shall kill him. If it is a daughter, she shall live. Pharaoh's plan's really smart. The men typically weren't in the room for this part, right? Like even now, a lot of men leave, right? The hospital or not the hospital, but the room when the wife is actually in labor. And in this moment, this was an empty room. What you would have is a midwife and a few other women, and everyone's listening to the midwife. She has complete control on that baby and how it's going to do. And Pharaoh's plan is so simple. All you got to do is fudge the numbers. All you got to do is just make sure when that thing comes out, the umbilical cord right around the neck. All you got to do, right, when this begins is just one simple shift, and it goes from a healthy baby to a dead baby, problem solved. I think I've told this story once, but I had a friend who I did personal training with, and as I got to know him and we're talking about the gospel, he comes to Christ, and I thought, man, this is awesome, this is amazing, and we began to talk more and more, and then one day, about 3 months later, he goes, hey, John, can we talk? And I said, yeah. And he said, not here. Can we go get a meal and sit down? And we sat down at what was like a Whataburger or something like that, like 6 a.m. And he goes, hey, I wanted to tell you something. It may be able to get me in a little bit of trouble, but I can't go into detail, but here's what you need to know. I work at a company that works in really high-end wealth. Like they were stockbrokers for like the uber elite kind of stuff. And he said, there's been some really unethical, illegal things happening at my company for years. I did a lot of that. When I accepted Christ, I stopped. Now we're getting investigated for some of this. And as the one person on the higher echelon who's not participating, I'm the one person everyone's pointing fingers at, and I don't know what to do. And this was such a hard thing to sit across from this man who, we had been through marriage counseling. We had talked about healthy boundaries, and we're working through all of this. And then all of a sudden, I'm seeing the life of Christ come into him in this new way, and he's growing. And then he just looks up and goes, I compromised for over a decade. And in the last year, I've moved away from this, but I'm about to be the fall guy for what happens. And I'm not a specialist on this. And I said, so you know this world. How does this play out and what happens to you? And he said, well, unless one of them confesses to what we're being investigated for, it's going to come back on me because they've made it clear as the one not participating anymore, I'm the one that can go. And it was such a difficult moment. It was a difficult moment, honestly, because for the first time in his life, he stood up to Pharaoh. And as he stood up to Pharaoh, the thing that came back was that it slapped him in the hand. And the very people he was standing beside became the ones that hurt him. And I will tell you in this story, thank God they actually did have evidence. They found enough to actually go and arrest 2 of the other people in that firm. And he actually did not get in trouble, thank God. But he was very clear with them when they asked, have you ever done this? Yes. When's the last time you did this? About 6 months ago. And by his own account, he could have easily been charged with the whole thing. And I bring this up because when push comes to shove, none of us who I think sit in that seat in that moment want to admit to that. What we want to do is go, those guys did it. It was a bad thing, not me. And yet here was this man, new to Christ, who stood up and said, even if it takes me to jail, I want to share this story and the truth of this. And I will tell you, one of the beautiful things is God was good to the midwives. God was good to my friend. And I'm still thankful to this day that he is now out of that company, but that he was able to walk through that, not only being faithful as a believer, but that God put his hand of protection over him. But there is something in this that makes you go, okay, so why do we move from fearing the Pharaoh to something else? Like, what is it that would make me actually stop fearing Pharaoh? And this is where fear of God comes in. You see, this is the very next thing we learn about the midwives, and we're going to unpack this fear of God, but I just want to catch it. I do not think fear of God means we do not fear pharaohs still. But I think we triage that. We recognize that fearing God allows me to fear Pharaoh properly. So let me show you what I mean. You see, when we fear God and we recognize that God is over all things, that he is sovereign over all creation, that he's the king of kings, right? The one over, quote unquote, the king of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that it's him we report to. And so all of a sudden, something happens where I'm at work and I see the wickedness of the company around me. I see the way they're bending rules. I see the fact that even though many companies act in a more Christ-centered way than many churches, that there's still wickedness in this because we are all humans and we are sinful. And all of a sudden, I see how things are broken and they need to shift and they need to change. And I go, I fear Pharaoh because I can't lose my job. I'm a newlywed. I can't lose my job. Like, this is, I just got to figure out how to survive this place. I can't stand up to this. And then something happens in that moment, which is that we recognize that if I work for someone of power, there is a power over him. And all of a sudden, I'm able to go, okay, I fear God. I want to stand before God holy and blameless one day. Because just like I have to report to this power, just like there's this thing in me sometimes that I'm afraid of, I need to be able to stand before God with a clean and a pure heart. And so fearing God can push us towards a courageous holiness in the midst of fear. When we're sitting there and we look at compromise and we see the things that we don't want to deal with, that we keep putting off, that conversation that we're afraid of having, and we go, I don't want this, I'm fearing the Pharaoh of that, that's a power in my house I don't want in my house, but I don't know what to do with it. Fearing God allows us to turn and to address that, because it pulls us back towards the highest authority. Number 2, fearing God can drive us to who we were made to be. I'm going to hammer this as much as I can because this is one of those things that I didn't understand for a long time. To become like Christ does not mean we cease being who we are. It means we step into the fullness of who we are. And I'm going to unpack this with Shapura and Pua in just a moment, but I want you to catch me when I say this again. To become like Christ is to step in the most version of you possible. You see, when we put sin to death, there's something in us that begins to think that that's part of who I am. But sin is not who you are. Sin is the brokenness that tries to derail you. And when Christ comes in and he puts that to death, you heal in a way that pushes you back towards who you were made to be. Even the beauty of this in the long term, right, is that as we step into eternity, you become more and more you than you were ever created to be. Like you were made and God goes, man, that's my boy. Like, that's my girl. You're beautiful. Even marred by sin, you are beautiful. And then slowly that cancer is pulled out. Slowly that death is dealt with. And all of a sudden he goes, that's it. That's who you were created to be. When we move towards fearing the Pharaoh, we quit living and moving the way we were designed to live. We become something less. We become something broken. We become something we're embarrassed of. But when we move towards godliness, we can deal with the brokenness. We can step into who we were meant to be, and it becomes a fight worth fighting, which is gorgeous, and it's beautiful to know that the work God does in us is a work that enables us, and it pushes us forward, and we become something more than we are. And then number 3, fear of God can give us hope to lay down our life for the sake of others. We have a young man, he's given me permission to share the story, but he is doing some mission work in Japan. Very excited he's there. And over the course of our conversation, if you're here the last few weeks, you've heard a little bit of some of our conversation pieces. But in a nutshell, the mission organization he joined was not a healthy mission organization. And he knew that, some of it going in, but he didn't know how bad. And then he got there and he began to see all kinds of horrible teaching and malpractice. And this was an organization that's tied to several abuse allegations and lawsuits right now. And he texted me and he said, "Hey, John, what do I do?" And I'll tell you what my first response was. Keep your head down, shut up, get out of sight. You cannot change this organization. You need to survive it. And he said, what if I'm afraid for the other people? Because some of these people are struggling and they're admitting they're struggling with this, but they're seeing this as what it means to follow Christ well. That this is what this relationship is supposed to be. And I said, if you're wanting to fight for others, you have to be willing to die in that fight. Are you willing to give up your relationship with this organization altogether? Are you ready to be cast out as the bad guy just for the opportunity to stand up for this? And now as a young man, he immediately said, yeah. And I said, slow down. Let's spend a week and let's pray and think through this. Because there's a wise way to do this. And you'll get more of that story, I'm sure, over time. But here's what I want you to catch. In that moment, Nate's heart, his heart shifted. Not from what happens to me. His heart shifted to is how do I help other people keep their relationship in Christ, watching some of the abuse taking place. And I love that because that's a man who fears God. And he said, I want to stand before, from him in our text messages, I want to stand before God one day knowing that I was faithful in truth even when I left here. And this is what fearing God does. It puts us in a place where we go, this may hurt me financially, this may hurt me with my work, this may hurt me with some of the coping mechanisms I've come up with. This may hurt me in so many ways, but if I'm going to live the way God created me to live, if I'm going to recognize who he is, and honestly recognize that if wrath comes, I would rather not get wrath from God than rather miss the Pharaoh's wrath, then all of a sudden we step into that and we go, okay, I'll face what is poor and pitiful today by God's standards, though it may scare me in the moment. And this is what fearing God does. It allows us to see the world for what it really is. It allows us to actually see priorities and to put away the things that will kill us and to put away childish things and begin to step into a full and affirming faith. And these two women were gorgeous at it. Why? Because look what happens. Exodus 3:17. But the midwives feared God and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. They let the male children live. Can we just go back to that? Pharaoh stands before them who has no problem killing babies. Just put that in perspective. And we think they're going to throw themselves on his mercy. Like this is no longer the Bond villain acting for a greater good, right? Like this is just the evil dude who wants to kill everyone. And all of a sudden, these two women, they go, even if it kills me, we fear God more than we fear you. And so they disobeyed the Pharaoh's order. And it's two midwives. It's two women at the very core of this. Not a courageous king, not this male leader. We don't even get Moses at this point. We just get two women who were help in the house, standing up to the powers over them for the sake of people who had what they did not have because they feared God. And then what do we get from this? The midwives fear God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let every child live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives, and he said to them, why have you done this? And he let the male children live. The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife comes to them. We can't say this is championing lying, right? Like there's part of me that goes, ooh, we need to address this. This is not championing lies. But what we do see in this moment is that they're even giving a little rib back at the Pharaoh. Like they're not just passively saying, please don't hurt us. They're like, our women are good. They're awesome. They're better than your women. Again, we're not going to say, look at the arrogance of that. Let's praise that. We are going to say, look at the courage of a woman who feared God over fearing Pharaoh. So let me just say this really quick, and then we're going to jump to the next thing. To fear God, you want to deal with the Pharaohs of your life. Fear God. You have that thing where you go, man, like, I don't know how to handle this. I'm afraid to address it, so I drown myself in alcohol. I have this thing, I'm afraid to address it, so I don't, well, let's be really honest, we're a young man. I don't date because I'm afraid of actually trying to put myself out there and date a woman. So I just come back and then I Well, there's no kids in here, and this is going to go on the internet. And then I find a way to medicate that later. You want to get to real health? Fear God and aim what he brings before you. Aim at what he calls good. Don't settle for less. Don't let the fear of Pharaoh wreck you. Stand up to it. Maybe you got to get a little haughty in that fight, right? Where you're like, I know this is going to destroy me, so I'm going to tell it off. One of my favorite songs from an 80s hair band, a Christian 80s hair band, so David will know who they are. This is Stryker. And they have a song that is 3 seconds long. And here's the whole song. It says, "To hell with the devil." And they sing it in hair metal funk. And they do it as half a joke, but what they're really saying is this: put away that which is of the devil. Send it off to where it belongs. It's an abomination. Bring back what is of God. Even though I cannot say, hey, let's lie and let's be arrogant, what I can say is maybe we can have a little spunk in our fight because of who God is in our life. And this is what we see these midwives do. But I do think there's a hard truth we have to acknowledge simply before we move on to understanding what these midwives did, and that is this: their actions did not stop the wickedness of the Pharaoh. You see, there's one hard truth, one thing that I think actually really does hurt in this story. It is this: so often I think that my righteousness will be that pillar moment that shifts something back to goodness. So often, right, I think of Braveheart, and I think if I can sacrifice myself in this moment and I can yell freedom as loud as I can, then the rebellion comes later, and we have this benchmark pivot move where my faithfulness paid off to change the world. But I want you to catch this in Exodus chapter 3. He calls the midwives don't do it. And then that's wrong, that should be Exodus 1. Jump to the very next verse, what do we get? Then Pharaoh commanded all of his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall not let every daughter live. Here's the premise, and I want us to catch this. If you stand up to wickedness probably isn't going to repent. It's going to find somebody else to walk beside it. If you stand up and you say, I won't participate in this anymore, the people who are proclaiming that in your life probably won't go, thank you for clarifying this was wicked and I need to stop. They're going to say, move on. I'll find someone else who will enable me to this. You see, one of the hardest truths for us is for some reason we think that our faithfulness is designed to change the world in a way that makes us feel the weight of changing the world. Yes, our faithfulness has an effect on the world. You go back and you look at Christianity. Christianity was the first country or the first thing in the world to ever bring charity as a virtue, humility as a virtue. You look at it and you look at hospitals and orphanages. You look at the advances of science. All of this came out of Christianity. Christianity changed the world in an amazing way. Women's rights and civil rights all came from a Christian worldview. But this was the effect. And when you and I think that our action is going to have this trickle effect, it creates an unrealistic weight on our life. And I don't think it goes away. I think this is a battle forever. I mean, even planting a church, and as I've gone through this over and over and over, there's part of me that goes, if I could preach better, if I can figure this out, if I can do this. And the reality is you and I, we're called to faithful obedience, and then we let God do with it what he does with it. And the beauty of these women is that they didn't try to change Pharaoh. They didn't make an argument back. They just went, we didn't do it. And they let that be the testimony that shifted what would happen in Exodus. Not through them anymore, but through a young man they may have never met. So I do want to say this, and then we'll jump to the Ishah, because we're going to move quick. There is this one really beautiful thing right in the core of this, which is even if we can't change and stop wickedness in the world, God's faithfulness, his goodness will see us through it. You see, the reality is at the core of this, if I stop and I realize it's not me that changes hearts, it is the Lord that changes hearts, then that weight begins to come off. And then all of a sudden I can just say, Lord, I just want to walk faithfully and I just want to walk obediently, and I want to love my wife well, I want to love my kids well, I want to love my church well, and I'm going to let you do what you do. And the beauty of this is that all of a sudden we can see God at work around us without feeling like we have to change the world ourselves. And the real beauty of this is here's what we get. So God was good to the midwives. Not because they changed the Pharaoh's mind, not because they righted a wrong, but simply because they faithfully feared God in spite of the danger of Pharaoh. The real beauty of this to me is that he blessed these women where they did not have the very thing they wanted. Look at how he blesses them. And the people multiplied even more than numerous. And they became the midwives, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. You see, I think one of the most beautiful things to me, one of the things that I think just never ceases to amaze me about the Christian God is this. He tends to take the biggest strongholds of wickedness in our heart, the most broken places in our heart, the places where we've given up all hope. And as he chips away and as he reveals himself and as he does something amazing, he begins to take that, and that's where he becomes a stronghold himself in our life. And so all of a sudden you have young men who have struggled with lust and with pornography and all of these things, and all of a sudden they step into husbandry. And they become a role model of what it means to be a godly man who's pursuing his wife well. You have these women who have struggled with self-image, like with their self-reflection, their self-worth, because they've grown up seeing fake women on the internet. And all of a sudden, as God takes charge of their heart, they step up and they become a role model for what it means to follow faithfully in the Lord and to see that. The real beauty is that the foothold of wickedness in our life today, no matter how big, no matter how small, no matter where it's at, it can become a stronghold of God the moment we begin to hand it back to him and fear him. And then one day you look up and you become a testimony yourself out of that stronghold. I used to struggle with alcohol, and here's what that looked like, so let me tell you why I'm free of that. I used to struggle with eating, or I used to struggle with this or with that, and here was the sin, here was the effect, here was the hurt in my life, and let me tell you how now I have freedom in this. The real beauty of this is that God will take our fears, the things that make us want to bow to Pharaoh, and he will give you courage. I mean, even Gideon, he finds Gideon cowering in the bushes, and you remember how he greets him? He doesn't say, hey, get up, you coward. He goes, get up, you brave and mighty warrior. Because as we step into who God made us to be, right, when we become more us, he calls us to strengthen those strongholds, to step into strength where there was weakness. What he offers is something far beyond what you and I can do on our own. And now with this as our background, I want to talk one more time briefly about those women, because what they embody is something called the Isha. And I've given this in sermons, and it's one of my favorite teaching points, but they have the heart of the Isha. So let me unpack this just to show you what it means. All the way back in Genesis, here's where we get introduced to this word. This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she is taken out of man. This is where woman is introduced in the biblical story. And there's a bit of a pun in the way that she's introduced. Adam is put to sleep in the story, and then it says that God comes out and he pulls, not her rib, don't be tricked by the English, he pulls from her side, or from his side, and he shapes woman from his side. And then Adam himself gives the pun, Isha. You see, here's what Isha means. Isha means someone who is adversarial when they need to be, but is always by my side, a benefactor. This is someone who stands across from me in the debate floor, even though they stand beside me in life. The Isha is someone who will say, you're wrong, and I'm going to stand up to tell you why you're wrong, even out of love for you. The real beauty of this, the thing that I absolutely love about this, is that so often, what I really think, and internet will kill me if they see this probably, is this. That oftentimes when I'm trying to lead well, I lead with here. I lead with the best I can and I reason the best I can. But we're not pure intellectual beings. And my wife has a better connection with her emotions and with, I would say, the fullness of the human experience. And there are times where I go, this is where we need to go, and this is why we need to go there, because I can tell you logically how that's going to work. And my wife, in wisdom, acting as the Isha, goes, I know that makes sense, but that's not how it's going to play out. And usually when we have those conversations, she's right. You see, the beauty of the Isha is that she, again, is willing to stand up and go, I love you enough to tell you you're wrong. I want to walk beside you in life, but at the end of this, I'm going to say, hey, this is off. It needs to change. And the reality is when you have a man without an Isha, right, and he's left on his own, he makes poor decisions. And when you have a woman and she doesn't have a place to be able to say, hey, you're wrong, Now you have two people making poor decisions. But a good woman, they stand up and they go, even if this hurts our relationship for the moment, you need to hear we're heading off the rails where we're at. And so what do you get? You have two women, Puah and Shipporah, standing beside the Israelites, the very people they're trying to help, standing across from the Pharaoh and telling them this isn't right. The beauty of these two women is that they embody what it means to be a mother even when they don't have children. That they will stand up and say, hey, even if this hurts my relationship with my kids, they need to know this needs to be addressed. One famous commentator once said this, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious. He said, men do everything they can to do nothing. Right? Like you want to knock everything off the plate and you want to say, I'm done, sit. Right? Like this is God, day 7. We rest. Women do everything they do to do something. Here's all the work I'm doing that we may be here, that we may set this. And most of the conflict in our life happens because I get to want to do nothing and my wife gets to wanting to do something, and those have now timed themselves out at the appropriate time that we're doing it simultaneously. And the reality is my wife steps in as the Ishah and she goes, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but these are the things that we need to address. This is what these women did. And again, I almost said we're going to talk about the not moms, because these midwives, they're not mothers yet. They're just stepping into who God made them to be. And the natural fulfillment of this is motherhood. The natural fulfillment of this is that they would have flesh of their flesh, bone of their bone, not just to walk beside, but to grow up and nurture and nourish constantly. And I want you to hear this because for some of us, you may not be blessed with kids. It doesn't make you less of a mother in the way God created you to be. He created you to be motherly. And these two women, they became mothers in this moment to an entire nation. And we remember them for it, and we named them for it. Not because they changed Pharaoh, but because they had the courage to stand against the Pharaoh out of fear for God, and they became motherly for kids who were not their own. So if you are struggling to have kids, if that is something for you or something you go, I don't know if I can do that, hear me when I say you are not less of a woman or less of a mom in that moment. But I do want you to hear that motherhood is the natural climax, the natural fulfillment of the very character God built within you. And even if you don't have kids of your own, if you adopt or you have no kids, you're going to find the desire to nourish come into your life, to protect. You're going to find the desire to stand against someone and go, I love you enough to tell you you're wrong. I'm on your side. And for our men, I think we need to learn to be thankful for that. It's hard to be thankful for that in the moment. But afterward, I will tell you I'm very thankful for my wife in that role. For my women in here, I just want you to hear that this is your God-given duty. The very way he created you was to stand up and say, hey, sometimes I need to speak even to my husband, even to my kids in a way that says we're going off course here. And this is why we praise these women. So I want to close us out and just go back to this. Exodus 1:20. So God was good to the midwives. God was good to the midwives because they feared him and they faithfully lived out the way God created them to be. And God is good to you and he is good to me. And when we line ourselves up with who he created us to be, and when we line ourselves up with what he's calling us to be, that goodness shines through. And I want you to hear me when I say that no matter the struggle, no matter what stronghold, no matter what Pharaoh is in your life that you look at and you are dealing with, that at the end of all of this is a God who is good. And when we line ourselves up with that, we live in the freedom of a good God. Pray with me. Father, I thank you. I thank you that you are good and true and holy. I thank you that you create us unique, man and woman, that you would create us to walk side by side, but to have someone to walk not just with, but someone who loves us enough, Father, to battle with us. I thank you that we have women in history and in our lives today to look at and say, wow, look how amazing, look how beautiful you are through their actions and through their faithfulness. And I pray that every woman in here, Father, recognizes the unique role you've given them. Not just in this moment, but who you've called them to be, who you've created them to be, and who you set them to be. And I ask that you would enable that you would love them well, that you would let us walk in your beauty and your truth, that we would fear you more than we fear Pharaoh, and that no matter where that battle with Pharaoh takes us, that we would find the strength to stand in your presence and know that you walk with us through all difficulty. In Jesus' name, amen.